Wall, IGN's Game of Thrones show. What a doozy of an episode. Already up to the penultimate episode of season 7.
Penultimate.
I am your host, Terry Schwartz. Joining me right now is our editor-in-chief, Steve Butts.
That's me.
Because, sort of like Jon Snow and team, we've traveled all over the realm this Dragons on the Wall season. You guys went to Australia with Lucy and Tristan. You had Joshua and Jim last week. And now we're up in San Francisco, where we are filming the penultimate episode of the Dragons on the Wall
Freezing north.
The freezing north. So this is going to be a really fun episode, I think, because you know that I am a major fan of Game of Thrones. If you don't already know, Steve is also a major fan of Game of Thrones. But we had some thoughts about this week's Beyond the Wall. But before we get into it, this is your weekly reminder that if you like Dragons on the Wall, like and subscribe, give us a good comment, let the world know, send out your super fast ravens, get them all over the world, and let them know that you enjoy this show. And also, we're gonna be getting into spoilers, so if you haven't watched Beyond the Wall, why are you here right now? Come back when you have. We like you. Come back and talk about spoilers with us. Is that a good warning?
Yeah,
Good
those
save?
ravens are super fast.
They're super
lately.
fast. I made a map. I want us to edit in the map I made because we went all over the realm in this episode. Dragons fly fast. I believe that. But so much happened in Beyond the Wall that I wonder, why the rush? Why the rush? Let's recap briefly what happened. So we leave Eastwatch with Jon and his band of merry men, and then we make it to this mountain that the Hound has seen. Normal pacing so far. They get trapped on an island for an indefinite period of time, but long enough for ice to melt. In that time, Gendry runs all the way back to Eastwatch, gets a raven from Eastwatch down to Dragonstone, which is very, very, very far down the coast. Dany gets it, thinks about it, clearly not too long, gets on her dragon, flies back up, gets up, saves the day at north of Eastwatch, brings everyone back to Eastwatch, and then they're on a boat by the end of the episode. It's a lot. It's a lot to have happen. It's like a season's length of time. The big reveal at the end of the episode is that the Night King has resurrected Viserion, one of Dany's dragons who he killed.
Well, you tell me it's Viserion. The show didn't bother to tell anybody.
Bother to tell me. It's such a huge revelation, but my big complaint is I just didn't think there was enough weight to these major events in this episode. Steve Butts, how do you feel?
There's not enough weight to anything in this episode. Honestly, I mean, you mentioned at the start that I'm a huge fan of Game of Thrones. I might not be as much after this episode. I went into this season kind of happy that they were accelerating the pace, getting us to a point where I felt like I can see the finish line for this series now, which is something that as a fan of the books from way back, it's a little bit of a sore spot for me, right? Like George R.R. Martin is notoriously late on delivering the next book, and even the update about when the next book is coming, right?
He isn't bothering doing that anymore.
And so when I saw that things were moving at the speed of plot, I felt, okay, this is great, but we're getting to a point now where it's sort of like the Cliff's Notes version of Game of Thrones, where you get the plot details, but you don't get any of the story elements. You mentioned sort of the emotional weight, and we had some really great moments in the first half of the episode where Jon goes to Jorah with Longclaw, and he's like, I want you to have this, and Jorah refuses it and explains very clearly who these two characters are and where they come from. And then you have that awesome scene where Beric is talking to Jon, and he says, hey, we're going to lose this fight, but we still have to fight.
Right, I thought everything they were saying about death and death being an enemy that you need to at least try to fight.
And they bring out this we are the shield that guards the realms of men, and suddenly the show got in touch again with what it all means. And then they jumped right off from that into plot, resolution. And it was interesting that you only ever see two characters talking to each other. They don't have these ensemble pieces. And so when you expect Varys to be in the throne room with Dany and Tyrion or Missandei, or even Bran, where's Bran and everything going on in Winterfell? And it's just I think for the sake of expediency, they're just rushing things by having two characters interact, resolve their thing, and move on.
So I disagree with you about the Tyrion complaint, because I think that in the last episode we saw Varys say to Tyrion, she needs advice from you.
Right.
Not from me, you are her hand. And he goes, I'm not her head. And he's like, okay, but you need to speak logically to her and get her to see the world as she should be viewing it. And I think that that's why that scene was really important. And also, there were a lot of jokes in the early seasons of Game of Thrones that so many of the scenes were two characters talking to each other. And I actually really enjoyed, in the first half of this episode, I actually went back and watched it twice, that in the first half we see a lot of these characters just interacting, and at first I felt like they were just sort of cleaning up loose plot threads, if you will. Like and Jon has Longclaw, and then Gendry is still pissed that they sold him to Melisandre. But I really did like those moments on second viewing. I felt like they were the missing character moments that we haven't had so far on this show. But then you think about how much is happening in the back half of the episode, and why are we rushing so hard? Like, they could have spread this out over a second episode. And I know there are budgetary concerns. Like, we understand that the reason why the dragons look so good and these action sequences, like in the Spoils of War, can be so just intensely, beautifully shot, are because they've truncated the season. But why the rush? And there could have been a scene. Theon has been at Dragonstone for 2 episodes waiting to talk to Dany about Yara.
Even assuming that that's right, that we can tell a good story with just 2 characters. We have this awesome situation in the North where Littlefinger is playing Sansa and Arya against each other, and he's brought Brienne into that discussion now when he tells Sansa, hey, Brienne promised to protect both of you. What do you think she would do if she found out you guys were fighting with each other? And then Sansa sends her away, which I still don't understand. But why is there not that scene where the 4 of them are working together, or where somebody other than Sansa is involved in the conversation, right? Why isn't Brienne talking to Littlefinger? Why isn't Arya talking to Littlefinger or Brienne? There's just very focused on this one kind of resolution.
I agree with you about that, but I do think that this is a show where everyone needs to come together. We heard that in the Sansa voiceover that we actually haven't heard on the show yet, so I'm guessing that's in the finale, hopefully. Because it was a great line. She said, the lone wolf dies and the pack remains.
Sure.
And this is very much a case of everyone being their own lone wolf. And I hope the lesson is that they all come together. I just wish that it wasn't so rushed, that we're here trying to figure out what is the point of all these things happening. And a lot of times Game of Thrones challenges the viewers to unpack it in a really interesting way.
Right.
And this time I just feel like I'm trying to understand what was the point of the dagger scene at the end with Arya. And we're getting way off course, but we are sort of focused on the issues we had with this episode. But I feel like some of the things I understood, talking to Matt Fowler, actually, who was busy live blogging SummerSlam. So I took on the mantle of reviewing a Game of Thrones episode, a rare Game of Thrones episode I really didn't like, which is sort of fun. I've not looked in the comments on that 6.9. But he read the scene between Littlefinger and Sansa, and then Sansa sending Brienne away in a way that I think is correct, which is that Littlefinger is setting the seeds of doubt in Sansa that if forced to choose, Brienne will choose Arya over Sansa. But we know that Littlefinger wants her to send Brienne away because Brienne is a threat. Brienne, every time she comes into a scene, and she's had nothing to do this season, but every time she comes into a scene, she's like, why is Littlefinger still here? Send him away. I don't want him around. And that is what he is trying to manipulate. But why would Sansa believe him? Why is Arya being tricked by him? These are the frustrations.
It's the classic Lost problem, where if Hurley and Charlie, or Jack and Sawyer, or Desmond, whoever, decide to just talk to each other like real human beings, 90% of the problems that the plot is involved in just go away. And I think they're worried about that happening. The way I read it was possibly that Sansa was afraid that she was going to be manipulated by Littlefinger into having Brienne kill Arya. And so, not trusting herself, she sent Brienne away. But for me, none of these characters are having a real conversation with each other the way the people in the North did, right? You had that awesome moment again with Jon and Jorah, with Jon and Beric, and then even Tormund and the Hound when they're talking about Brienne, there's nothing getting resolved there. You're just learning a little bit more about why these guys are cool, kind of what they're bringing to this mission in the way of motivation and what their hopes are for the future. And and it sounds perverse, but the only people who died in the North were people I didn't know, I didn't care about. They literally had no names. And when there was that awesome moment where they could have done something interesting with Tormund, they backed away from it. I don't know why, because there's probably some resolution down the line they want to play out with them.
Yeah, I feel loath to say that Game of Thrones is no longer, or is becoming too predictable, because I don't think that's the case. Unless you read the leaks, then you probably didn't know that Viserion was going to die. You probably didn't even know that it was Viserion who died, because the dragons are pretty indistinguishable in colors. And I agree, we were talking a little earlier about how Thoros, of all those characters, is the safest. But interestingly, there is now no way out, as the Hound said to Beric, this was your last life. And unless Melisandre comes back, my theory is that there's going to be a little sort of Stoneheart action, and maybe Jon dies and Beric sacrifices himself to bring Jon back. But I agree with you that these it still feels safe down to Dany coming in to save the day. If this had been stretched over 2 episodes, we might have wondered, is there any way they get out of here? But we're at the point in the show where it's like, okay, no, when is Dany's dragon going to come? Because that's obviously all these important plot characters are going to get out of here.
So I want to talk about Dany, but first I do want to talk about the Beric thing. I feel like if the show had had a little bit more time, then it could have played up that angle a little bit more. That like his free life that he gets whenever he dies is gone now. So like the stakes have been raised for me, just in terms of the story telling me the stakes have been raised, but they never show it.
Right.
There's this big battle, and like, wouldn't it have been better if Beric, knowing that he can't ever come back to life again, if he's the one instead of Jon, who is fighting off the White Walkers while they're trying to get the dragon up in the air, right? And you kind of know from this character that like it's over for him.
Yeah, I think it's rare. Like, there's been so much action this season, and so many just incredible episodes too. Like, I've really enjoyed a lot of this season so far. But for this, it was the quiet moments that I enjoyed the best, and the action that I thought was a bit dumb action. I do want to get into some more specific moments and theories that we have about what comes next. But to me, one of my favorite scenes in the episode was the very final scene where not the very final scene, the very final scene between Dany and Jon when they're on the boat. And for the first time all season, really, we see Daenerys as a vulnerable woman.
I didn't buy it.
You didn't buy it?
No.
I very much did, and Joshua and I every week will do a check-in where we'll be like, do you ship it? Do you ship it between Jon and Dany? And 2 weeks ago I was like, I'm starting to. I find this relationship very easy, and for everything again to be happening so fast, I don't really buy that. But I did like, the idea that she sees something so worthy of respect, and she is really shaken in a way that she can't show anyone but an equal.
What does she see that's worthy of respect? I don't understand what you mean by that.
He's a great leader who is just as abrupt in his decision making as she is, and maybe not looking at the full political
no, but
picture.
she says earlier exactly the opposite of that. When Tyrion says,
but she does the same thing.
But he says, don't be impulsive, don't act out of anger. You burn Dickon and the Tarly guy. And she says, I didn't do that out of anger, right? You have this real sense that like she's very calculated, like she keeps everything like really close. So for her to break down and get a little weepy just because this guy bends the knee to her, I didn't buy that at all. That goes against everything I think they've said about who her character is.
Remember that one time they said a line about how these are her children?
That, yes. So if she's sad about the dragon, if she's sad about the dragon, I could totally buy that. And I didn't get the sadness from her about the dragon.
Yes.
And so it seemed false to me that like suddenly Jon says, I'll bend the knee to you, and like she gets weepy about that. That's not the Dany that I know. So I don't like that about her character. It's far and away much better than what they're doing with Arya. I hate what they're doing with Arya.
And we're going to talk about that in a bit. But before that was like a whole many minutes of criticisms. I know typically we unpack episodes more, but I think that's the interesting thing to unpack about this. I do want to switch over to what I consider the most interesting revelation of this episode, which is we finally know how to defeat the Night King and his army. Like, to me, that is really interesting and something the show didn't play up that much. But we got our first look at how the Night King will most likely be defeated.
You got the clue of Jon hitting the White Walker, and then all the Whites drop dead. And then there's a sort of sympathy between the White they have on the rock, and they kick him, and everybody else kind of groans. Like,
I didn't even notice that. That's really...
Yeah, like they built up this sense of connection between them all, which I thought was really smart.
I think that's really smart, and I always wonder with moments like these, did it come from George? But to me, it is the most clean way that the show can set up to easily defeat these many, many whites that are out there, because it's not necessarily the White Walkers themselves that are the threat, beyond that the Night King can resurrect everyone anytime there's a battle, which is very dangerous. But for the first time we know, really all you have to do mostly is defeat the various White Walkers, and then at least the vast majority of the army will drop dead. Something that people were pretty confused about, and the show's been playing a little fast and loose with, is how do you create a White? Is it simply that the White dies north of the wall, or a person dies north of the wall and are brought back? Does the Night King need to resurrect them? If he touches them, they seem to become like a White Walker. I think that it's not as simple as, you die north of the wall and you're brought back. I think the concern is that if there are a bunch of dead bodies preserved in the cold lying around, the Night King can walk by and resurrect them. But what did you make of this? Were you getting frustrated that, they could have just taken this guy who was killed by a bear and headed back and not had to worry about even getting a White?
Yeah, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But again, that's one of the I think narrative conveniences they're putting in place for the sake of the plot. Same thing with like the Night King doesn't throw the spear until almost all the army's destroyed.
And Drogon is right there.
And then you've got
right there.
You've got the unkillable Jon Snow. It's like there's a lot of just convenient things in this that don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, like they ended up on plot ice is what I kept joking last night.
Yeah, so I love the idea of the mission, the sort of like ragtag Magnificent Seven style group going out. But I think in order for that to work, they have to come back like having been utterly defeated, right? For me to have cared about that mission, something bad has to have happened. And like Thoros dies. Nobody cares about Thoros.
See, I was sort of wrestling with this as well, and I was like, why is this happening now? Why did Dany have to go and face the Night King and his army now before we're even at the end of season 7? There are 6 more episodes in season 8 plus the finale. Like to me, this felt like a season 8 moment. And thinking about it, and again, I went back and I watched the episode a second time after it aired, and I really think it's not only to have Daenerys know and see this threat. Though I was joking, I'm like, maybe the finale, they're just going to fly Cersei up there because it's so easy to get from King's Landing, like up to north of Eastwatch where the army is.
Right.
I think that it's not only to have her know, but so that we as the audience can get our first clue that these people can be defeated. All she has to do is fly in with a night, like attack the Night King with one of her 2 remaining dragons. Yeah. Though now the added threat is he has his own zombie dragon, not ice dragon, because in Martin's works, ice dragon are like a different sort of dragon species. Interesting distinction. Do you have any final thoughts on sort of this big revelation part of the episode?
I mean, you mentioned like maybe that's a season 8 thing, but like it's important to remember there are 7 episodes left, right? So this is basically, this to me is the final season. This year and the subsequent year. That's the final season of the show, in my opinion. So I don't think there's a lot of room for them to do stuff in season 8. Obviously, if we want to talk about what's next, they've got to come together, and like there's still more plot to be resolved. But for me, I think this felt right where it was. I was just frustrated that there was so much just kind of convenient storytelling that didn't ring true for me, both in terms of some of the characters' motivations and in terms of what happens between them.
What a perfect transition to Arya and Sansa. I don't get it. I don't get what the dynamic is supposed to be at play between these 2 characters. To me, the thing that makes the most sense and why Arya is so frustrated at Sansa, which is frustrating to me, but everything that she's seen Sansa do thus far, to me, would underline her negative conception she had of her sister when she was a child. Like, we know that there was tension between Arya and Sansa because they were just completely different types of people. And Arya, to me, is being pretty unfair to Sansa because we've seen everything she's gone on. But to come back, to have that sort of last shot she had of Sansa, her standing up there with Joffrey, to see that she did at least have some complicity, even if her hand was forced, in Ned's death, and then to see that she's back and already trying to plot her way to the top of Winterfell. Like, I understand where she would see that and be frustrated and maybe think that Sansa's still an enemy. But Arya's not stupid, and she's acting stupid, and that's driving me nuts.
Yeah. I mean, the best Arya is the scrabbling, like really, really trying to make it work Arya, who's got the world against her, and she's got this list of people she wants to get even with. That's the interesting Arya to me. This Arya in Winterfell, I don't recognize and I don't even like. And I was kind of I'm on Sansa's side, ultimately. I'm kind of indifferent to her as a viewer. In terms of liking her character, I actually don't like her anymore. Just based on the interactions from the last couple of episodes, particularly last night, where it's that lost problem. They're not talking. Meanwhile, you've got Bran sitting right over there by a tree, who's not even in the episode, and he could resolve a lot of this stuff. And they're just, again, like the narrative convenience of, well, let's not have Bran get involved in the discussion because then our story becomes less interesting because the problem we've been building up evaporates.
Yeah, I mean, Game of Thrones always had the problem of balancing its many, many characters. Now it's brought them all together and it's still having a hard time balancing them. Like, again, where is Theon? Where is Bran this episode? He's in Winterfell.
Where's Varys? Where's Missandei?
Right,
yeah.
and
where's
Sam? I think it's interesting, this conflict that they have between them. But again, I just am struggling to see, and when I watched Arya give Sansa the dagger, I'm like, what was the point of this scene? Is it a threat? Is she trying to talk her up to kill Littlefinger? Like, what is the point of this dagger ultimately? And I stand by my theory about what I had like in the second episode is more interesting than what they've done this season, because it's just like hot potato. What is what is the point? Like, do you have any theories on what that scene meant?
I really don't. I don't know. It seems like Arya's turned from like this like really like cool tomboy courageous character who's driven by vengeance to now like a sociopath. I mean, it's like a Hannibal Lecter style moment in there when she's talking to her, and I feel like I don't relate to that character. I have no sympathy for that point of view or that approach. So I have no idea what they're doing to her.
So this is a situation where I don't have a theory for you guys, but I would love to hear yours. So this is my call to action. If you do have any good theories about whether Arya or Sansa have a master plan, I am vetoing Matt Fowler's theory that Arya is someone else somehow. But if you have a good theory backing that up or anything else, let us know in the comments. There are a couple of different talking points we didn't discuss. The big one I want to talk about very briefly before we move into predictions for the finale, the fun stuff, is Benjen's reappearance. I just find myself very frustrated by that. Right. Cold Hands deserved better because the showrunners just keep calling him Cold Hands. I'm like, you guys don't have the right to call him Cold Hands. Not my Cold Hand.
Right.
Were you? To me, that was whiplash. Like, were you excited to see him again? Do you think that was a suitable way for him to go out?
It's the disconnect of putting characters in peril, but then not like fairly regarding the stakes of that peril and sort of circumventing it with this convenient plot device where, again, like Jon comes out of the ice. Well, that wasn't super surprising to me, but it didn't make any sense. And then he's there and Benjen shows up and that doesn't make sense. And then Benjen says, there's no time, you have to go without me. And that didn't make sense because it's like, no, it'd be just as fast for us to go together. You're actually running away from the escape to confront these guys, and there's no reason to do that. Kind of, honestly, I felt the same way with Jon trying to protect the dragon at the end, right? There was no need for that. And so I didn't like what they did with Benjen. I think it's a terrible resolution to what is in the books a very interesting character.
Yeah, I personally would have been fine if Benjen leaving Bran at the wall was like the last we saw of him. And I get that. I mean, I guess he was just monitoring the Night King's army. But to me, it's like they face the showrunners face their own Myrni's not here, which is the infamous reason that Dance of Dragons took too long is George R. R. Martin couldn't figure out how to make what happened in Meereen happen. And here, like, Jon fell in the ice, but we already sent Dany away, so what do? Let's bring in Benjen.
Well, part of the delay was also he realized his characters were too young and he needed to age them up. The show doesn't have that problem. It doesn't need to pad it out so that you're believing that these characters are 18 years old.
But Steve, they aged 17 years over the course of this episode because that's how they were able to travel around. No, I found myself pretty frustrated and similarly frustrated by the way that the inside of the episode explained these character motivations in a way that was not apparent on the screen. You mentioned that Jon was supposed to be defending Drogon so he could take off, which is not how it played. When I watched it with the group, everyone was screaming, get on the dragon, get on the dragon. Yeah. And to the showrunners, he was supposed to be defending the dragon so it could take off. There was no look on Dany's face like she was ever taking off. And similarly, they drew this connection that, first of all, they didn't have enough time to establish who Cold Hands was, which is why they just had him rip off his mask so Jon knew. Like, that would answer any freaking questions.
I would have lost my mind if that had been me, and he doesn't. Like, he's just like, Uncle Benjen.
He was freezing to death, I guess, but I think he was more like Uncle Benjen. But then they said Jon has to respect his decision because he just did the same thing. I don't think he does. Like, that, to me, big problems with how Benjen went out. And apparently he did officially die, which again I didn't get from the episode because I figured he survived everything else. But the showrunners say, R.I.P. Benjen.
And then 5 minutes later, Jon's back at the wall, safe with Dany, and everybody's fine.
That was 3 weeks. That was 3 weeks in between 30 seconds.
I feel like I'm being overwhelmingly negative. I still love Game of Thrones. I feel like the show is kind of jumping the shark for me at this point.
Well, on that note, let's transition into the big moment of this week's episode, Season 7 finale predictions. I'm still so excited. Maester Hypemon, if you've watched my favorite video about Game of Thrones, which is the Clegane Bowl hype video. I feel like Maester Hypemon is here because at this point, Game of Thrones can do whatever the F they want. And I think they're for sure going to do Clegane Bowl in the finale. I think there's like no question. And I've like been playing a fun game of piecing together all like the footage from the trailers that haven't come out yet. And there's this one shot of a guy who to me looks a lot like the Hound, down in the south, like wielding his sword. And I was like, well, how could they ever get the Hound down to King's Landing this season? Probably in between episodes, if I was to guess at this point, in the speed that they're going. In the promo for next week's episode, and I guess this is when we talk about the fact that we're going to be potentially spoiling in theoretical form next week's episode. We see Cersei meeting Jon Snow, Davos, I think Eric is there. Like, you see a lot of different characters who are from the group, notably not the Hound.
They're all in King's Landing.
Yeah, well, they're all in the Dragon Pit.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And so they're meeting on this platform that looks a heck of a lot like the last time they had a trial by combat with Oberyn and the Mountain. And I feel like if ever they were to have the time to have Sandor Clegane the Hound fight Gregor Clegane the Mountain, Like, this will be it. And why wouldn't they at this point? They're doing everything else to this scale. Do you like the Clegane Bowl theory? I know it's very popular with a lot of fans, and I personally am not a huge fan of it.
So I would like for those two characters to fight if there's any sort of emotional meaning behind it, right? Like, if it makes narrative sense, then I think absolutely let the two biggest guys in the entire kingdom, who are brothers and who kind of hate each other and are on opposite sides, let them go at each other. That's a opportunity for tremendous drama and storytelling. I would love it if they did it that way. It may just be sort of a toss-off because, oh, look, this is popular on Reddit. Let's throw it in to give the fans what they want.
And a lot of people, when I wrote up a piece about how I think Clegane Bowl is coming, the hype that was promised, are like, no, that doesn't make sense. Maybe she finally will have Ilaria get brought out, which I don't think we'll see Ilaria this season. I believe Indira Varma, who plays her, said she's not in this season anymore. She could bring out Yara. It looks like Theon is going to come back into the fray. But I still just feel like what we're building up to, like, Cersei will have had 2 episodes to figure out what am I going to do when this Dragon Queen shows up. I can't beat her dragons. Well, I do have the strongest zombie man alive. Why don't I say trial by combat and then I'll listen to you? Right. The real question is, like, why would Sandor Clegane be the one who Dany nominates? But I would imagine he would nominate himself in that situation. Like, I already didn't stand up to this evil enemy, and I let Thoros die in front of me in this last episode because he was burning live, and they keep getting brought up how he was thrown into the fire. Like, maybe he will finally stand up and want to face his brother in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally possible. For me, that is an interesting opportunity for them to do some cool storytelling. For me, the big things it needs to resolve are, is Arya going to get through her list? Is Littlefinger going to gets what's coming to him? Is anybody actually going to be upfront about Jon's parentage? And what's the resolution going to be there between him and Dany? Like, that's what I want to see in the finale is, for this season at least, I want to see that knowledge come to light.
So do you think in this finale, though, these are predictions, so you can declare if you think it's going to happen? I mean, we know that Gilly has the book, Sam's traveling from Old Town, presumably going back up to Winterfell. Bran is there, he should know. Do you think that will come out in this episode?
I think that somebody who knows will tell Jon. I think that is too important a plot element to leave dangling for next season.
That's a good finale moment.
It's a great finale moment. It's for Jon to figure out, oh, he's not actually a Stark on his father's side. He's a Stark on his mom's side. And by the way, he's half Targaryen. And by the way, he's Dany's nephew, right? Which is a whole nother weird situation.
Yeah, if that happens, we will dedicate at least an hour to the incest of it all. And that's my promise to you guys. Bonus episode, if that comes out in the finale and Dany finds out that Jon is her nephew. Hypothetically, I mean, come on, it's going to happen.
But you mentioned like Ilaria and Theon. I don't care about that. I mean, I'm more interested in seeing what happens between Jaime and Tormund if they're both interested in Brienne.
And you know that's going to happen. Okay, so we have Clegane Bowl. Right. We have Jon's parentage coming out. Right. We have for sure love triangle between Tormund, Brienne, and Jaime. It's got to happen. I do think that the Littlefinger storyline will come to a climax. It has been so delicately paced all season long. The one thing that's been very slow this season, I think that, and I genuinely have no idea which direction it's going to go. I would imagine Littlefinger eats it, like someone will turn against him. But if not, I could see the Stark sisters full on battling against each other, because we know that Sansa is still up at Winterfell, and she has that line, "The lone wolf dies, but the cat remains."
I want to see Arya kill Cersei. I don't think they're going to do that, though. I don't think that's good. It's certainly not going to happen this week.
Yeah.
But like, Cersei has to get it. They've got to save her for next season. She's too good a villain to let go before the final season. I really thought
going into the season that she might die. I thought that might happen, but I think she does have plot armor at this point.
Who fills the void for her, though, right?
I mean, well, I thought that season 7 would focus a lot more on the internal conflict in Westeros, and season 8 would look outward. I really didn't expect to see them all coming together in this way and have Dany, presumably, because we don't see her in the promo, Jon and Cersei all in the same place. That being said, I think it's finally time. I think the Night King has a dragon. I think that they are going to reach the wall, and I never was one very partial to the theory that the wall is going to come down. But if ever a show was to do it, it's Game of Thrones at this point. And I'm just going to predict it. The wall will come down.
What? No, you're crazy.
You don't think so?
No, you're crazy.
I even did the Night King thing.
They set it up in the books so much more strongly, and they've deviated so far from that.
Do you think he's going to make it, the Night King and his army will make it to and or past the wall?
Oh, absolutely. I don't. Finale. I think there is possibly an assault on Castle Black or Eastwatch. I think the Night King does make it through. I don't think they make it all the way down to Winterfell, or maybe they hear from Brienne, who's leaving, like, oh my God, the Night King is coming. But no, I don't think they tear down the wall. But I don't think that enemy makes sense unless they're actually in the lands that we care about, and the other characters on the show care about. Nobody cares about the North.
Do you think that the Night King can fly on zombie
100%,
Viserion
100%.
over the wall?
Yes, absolutely. If Dany can do it, the Night King can do it.
Yeah, so maybe that happens. But he needs his armies behind him. Yeah. Okay, do we have any other? So let's recap. Clegane Bowl. We have
Tormund and Jaime.
Tormund, Jaime, love triangle. Jon's parentage coming out. Whatever's going to happen with Littlefinger happens with Littlefinger. And at least the Night King reaches the wall, if not it coming down.
Yeah, I feel pretty solid about at least
those
3
are
or
like
4
all
of those.
the characters that are left alive.
Yeah.
All right, well, we definitely want to know your predictions. Please, 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 if you've read the leaks, if you know what happens in the finale, don't give it away in the comments. But if you want to play the fun game of theories with us, sound off in the comments below. We definitely want to know. I think that's our show this week. That was a long one. We had a lot of thoughts, but we always appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciated everyone tweeting back when I did the call for talking points. I think we got most of them, but if not, we got a big episode for the finale. It's going to be an extra long episode of the show as well. So we're going to record it night of. You lucky folk, you're going to have to wait until Monday for your Dragons on the Wall. You're going to get it next Sunday night. And of course, we'll do our follow-up season 7 analysis as well. But that's about it for us. Another reminder to like, subscribe, and tell everyone you know if you want to talk about Game of Thrones more. Check out our show. Steve, thanks so much for being a great co-host this week.
Thanks, Terry.
Such a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next week.